Paris, 1925. 5 of France's most powerful businessmen sat around a private dining table in the city's most expensive hotel. They had each received a confidential government letter. Stamped. Official. Signed. The letter invited them, personally, to a secret meeting about the future of the Eiffel Tower. What none of them knew, as they unfolded their napkins and sipped their wine, was that the man sitting at the head of the table was not a government official. He had never worked for the French government. He had never held any official position of any kind. He was a criminal. A con man. A ghost who had been arrested over 50 times across 12 countries. And by the time they finished dinner, he would have sold them the Eiffel Tower. Part 1. The Origin of a Ghost. He was born in a place that didn't want him, and became a man nobody could catch. His real name was Robert V. Miller. But nobody in history remembers Robert V. Miller. They remember Victor Lustig. Born in 1890 in Hostin, a small town in what is now the Czech Republic, Lustig grew up watching the wealthy pass through his town like they owned the air itself. Hotels, carriages, expensive coats. And always, the look. The look that said, "You are beneath me." Most people absorb that look and accept it. Victor Lustig studied it. By the time he was a teenager, he had already discovered something that would define his entire life. People don't see what is actually in front of them. They see what they expect to see. A man in an expensive suit, sitting in a first-class cabin, speaking with quiet authority, is automatically assumed to be important. Nobody checks. Nobody asks. The assumption is the costume. And if you wear it well enough, the world will fill in the rest of the story for you. Lustig crossed the Atlantic Ocean over 50 times on luxury ocean liners. Not because he loved travel. Because ocean liners were floating ecosystems of wealthy, bored people, isolated from the world, surrounded by the illusion of safety, with nothing to do but talk, drink, and gamble. Lustig ran card games. Poker, mostly. But not the kind where you cheat with hidden cards. The kind where you read the other player so completely, their tells, their needs, their desperation to appear confident in front of others, that the cards barely matter. He was fluent in 5 languages. He dressed immaculately. He listened more than he spoke. And he had one rule that he followed with religious discipline. Never rush. The man who rushes reveals that he needs something. The man who waits makes others believe they need him. By his late 20s, Lustig had been arrested more than 50 times across Europe and America. Fraud. Impersonation. Forgery. He escaped or talked his way out of almost all of it. He was not lucky. He was precise. And in 1925, sitting in a Paris hotel room, reading a newspaper, he found the opportunity of a lifetime. The newspaper article was about the Eiffel Tower. Specifically, about the cost of maintaining it. The rust. The repairs. The structural concerns. The city of Paris was allegedly considering what to do with the aging structure. Most people read that article and forgot about it by the time they turned the page. Victor Lustig read it, and a smile crossed his face. Because he saw something in that article that nobody else saw. He saw a transaction. Part 2. The setup. A con this big doesn't begin with a lie. It begins with a truth that nobody questions. Here is what Lustig understood about human psychology that most people never will. The bigger the lie, the harder it is to question. Small lies invite scrutiny. If I tell you I found $5 on the street, you might ask where. But if I tell you I'm a senior government official responsible for the secret sale of France's most famous monument, the claim is so enormous, so specific, so audacious, that your brain doesn't file it under possible lie. It files it under this must be real, because who would say this if it wasn't? Lustig rented a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of Paris's most expensive and prestigious hotels. He had custom stationery printed, official-looking letterhead, government seals, the title Deputy Director General of the Ministère des Postes et Telegraphs. He personally selected 5 scrap metal dealers from a list of Paris's most prominent businessmen. Not randomly. Carefully. He chose men who were wealthy enough to afford a major transaction, but hungry enough to want more. Men whose ambition exceeded their caution. He sent each of them a personalized letter, marked confidential. The letter explained that due to sensitive political and financial considerations, the maintenance costs of the Eiffel Tower had become untenable. The French government was considering a private sale of the tower for scrap metal. The matter was extremely sensitive. Absolute discretion was required. Each recipient was invited to a private dinner at a prestigious address. They were asked to tell no one. They all came. Think about what had already happened before Lustig said a single word at that dinner. The venue told them, "This is serious." The letter told them, "You have been chosen." The confidentiality told them, "You are special." By the time they sat down, Lustig had already done most of the work. He arrived last, dressed impeccably, greeted each man by name. He had researched each of them. He spoke with the calm, measured authority of a man who makes decisions that affect thousands of people. He explained the situation. The tower was old. The maintenance was expensive. The government had quietly decided to sell it for scrap. The contract would go to one company. The sale price, 250,000 francs. He paused. Let the number sit in the room. And then he said the line that sealed everything. "Gentlemen, I must ask for your absolute discretion. If this becomes public knowledge before the transaction is complete, there will be political consequences. I trust one have chosen the right men for this conversation." They nodded. Every one of them. Because he hadn't just offered them a business deal. He had offered them membership in an exclusive group. And humans will do almost anything to stay in a group they believe is exclusive. Now here is where the story gets interesting. Because Lustig didn't just sell the Eiffel Tower once. He sold it again. And the second time, the buyer he chose was even more interesting than the first. But before I tell you that, let me show you exactly what happened to the man who bought it the first time. Part 3. The sale. He didn't just take the money. He gave them a reason to never report him. Among the 5 businessmen, one stood out to Lustig immediately. His name was André Poisson. Poisson was newer to Paris's business elite than the others. He had money, but he didn't have the connections, the history, the social standing that the others took for granted. And Lustig, who could read a room better than most people read a book, saw it immediately. Poisson wanted this deal more than the others. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. A man brought into a secret government transaction at this level, that was someone. That was legitimacy. That was the confirmation he had been chasing his entire career. Lustig made his move. He arranged a private follow-up meeting with Poisson. And in that meeting, he did something that surprised even Poisson. He became hesitant. He hinted, very carefully, very delicately, that the process involved certain administrative costs. Fees that were not officially part of the transaction. The kind of arrangements that senior officials sometimes required to ensure the paperwork moved smoothly. He was asking for a bribe. And here is the dark genius of it. Poisson didn't recoil. He leaned forward. Because a government official asking for a bribe is a real government official. Corrupt officials exist. Clean ones are suspicious. The bribe was the proof of authenticity that no document could have provided. Poisson paid. He paid the full 250,000 francs for the scrap contract. And he paid an additional amount, in cash, directly to Lustig as a personal facilitation fee. Lustig shook his hand, promised the paperwork would arrive within the week, and left Paris the next morning. Poisson waited. The paperwork never came. He contacted the government. They had no record of any such transaction. No Deputy Director General by Lustig's name existed. The Eiffel Tower was not for sale. And here is what Poisson did next, the moment that reveals exactly how completely Lustig had calculated this. He told nobody. Not the police. Not the press. Not the other businessmen. Because to report the scam, he would have to admit that he had paid a bribe to a government official. That he had agreed to participate in what he believed was an inside deal. His reputation. His standing. His business. Lustig hadn't just taken his money. He had taken away his ability to fight back. He sold the Eiffel Tower, and made the buyer too embarrassed to report it. When Lustig arrived safely in Vienna with the money, he was already planning the return. Most criminals, at this point, would disappear. Never return to the scene. Never repeat the risk. Victor Lustig booked a train back to Paris. He was going to sell the Eiffel Tower again. Part 4. The second sale. The greatest con is the one you run twice in the same city. Back in Paris, Lustig assembled a new list. New businessmen. New stationery. New hotel. Same presentation. Same confidential letter. Same dinner. And this time, the second buyer almost reported him. This man, unlike Poisson, went immediately to the police when the paperwork didn't arrive. Lustig, who had been monitoring the situation, was already on a train out of France before the police finished taking the report. He was never caught for the Eiffel Tower scams. Not once. Not for either of them. The French police were embarrassed. The buyers were humiliated. The story was suppressed by everyone involved. And Lustig moved on to his next project. Part 5. The Money Box and Al Capone. He didn't just con businessmen. He conned the most dangerous man in America. What came next was either the bravest or the most insane thing any conman in history has ever done. Victor Lustig sat across a table from Al Capone. Al Capone. The man who had people killed for looking at him wrong. The most feared criminal in America. The man that the entire FBI was trying and failing to catch. Lustig went to him voluntarily. He had an investment proposition. He told Capone he had a scheme that would double his money in 60 days. He asked for $50,000 to execute it. Capone handed it over. Most people, at this point, would have simply disappeared with $50,000 and hoped that Al Capone somehow never found them. Lustig did not disappear. 60 days later, he returned to Capone's office. He sat down across from one of history's most violent men, and he pushed the $50,000 back across the table. Untouched. Every dollar. He told Capone the scheme had fallen through. He hadn't been able to execute it. Here was the money back, every cent. Capone stared at him, and then he handed Lustig $5,000 as a tip for his honesty. What had actually happened? Lustig had simply kept the $50,000 in a safe deposit box for 60 days. He never had any investment scheme. He returned the money because he knew, with absolute certainty, that a man who returns Al Capone's money when he could have disappeared with it, becomes the one person Al Capone trusts completely. He turned $50,000 into $5,000 by giving $50,000 back. And he now had Al Capone as a reference. This is not luck. This is the most sophisticated understanding of human psychology ever applied to crime. By the 1930s, Lustig was operating in America on an entirely different scale. He had created something he called the Romanian box, a device he claimed could replicate $100 bills. He sold this device, which was simply a wooden box with 2 compartments and some blank paper, to dozens of victims across America for prices ranging from $10,000 to $46,000. He was eventually caught. Not for the Eiffel Tower. Not for Al Capone. For counterfeiting actual US currency. But even then, the story wasn't over. Part 6, the final act. Even in handcuffs, he was still running a con. In 1935, Lustig was arrested in New York. Federal agents had been tracking him for months. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had him. He was taken to the Federal House of Detention in Manhattan to await trial. And then, Victor Lustig escaped. He tore his bedsheets in 2 strips, lowered himself from his window, walked calmly onto the street, and disappeared into New York City. He was recaptured a month later in Pittsburgh. At his trial, he was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. The island prison in San Francisco Bay from which, officially, no one ever escaped. He died in Alcatraz in 1947. Of pneumonia. Still incarcerated. But on his death certificate, in the field for occupation, Victor Lustig wrote one word. Apprentice salesman. Even at the end, he was still performing. The dark psychology breakdown. What he knew about you that you still don't know about yourself. Now I want to step back from the story. Because Victor Lustig was not special. Not in the way we usually mean. He was not smarter than his victims. He was not more educated. He was not more connected. He understood one thing, one single thing, that his victims did not. People make decisions based on emotion and justify them with logic afterwards. The scrap metal dealers didn't buy the Eiffel Tower because Lustig's paperwork was convincing. They bought it because they felt chosen. Because they felt that they were the kind of man who gets invited to secret government transactions. The emotion came first. The logic, the reasons they told themselves, came after. André Poisson didn't pay because the deal was believable. He paid because not paying would have meant admitting that he didn't belong in that room. The cost of the con was less than the cost to his ego of walking away. Al Capone didn't give Lustig $5,000 because Lustig was honest. He gave it because Lustig understood that Capone, underneath the violence and the power, was a man who desperately wanted to trust someone. And the one person who returns your money when they could have taken it becomes the most trustworthy person you've ever met. Lustig didn't exploit greed. He exploited the human need to see ourselves a certain way. The need to be important. To be chosen. To be the kind of person who belongs in elite rooms. To be trusted. To be right. These are not weaknesses of foolish people. These are the architecture of every human being alive. Including you. Including me. The only protection, the only one that actually works, is to understand the mechanism before someone else activates it. When you feel chosen, ask why. When an opportunity feels exclusive, ask who benefits from that exclusivity. When something is presented as confidential, ask what the confidentiality is protecting. Not because every opportunity is a con, but because the ones that are designed to feel exactly like the ones that aren't. Conclusion, the final correction. Victor Lustig sold the Eiffel Tower twice. He conned Al Capone and walked away with a tip. He escaped from federal custody, was recaptured, and served his time in Alcatraz, still performing, right to the end. But here is what I want you to take from this story, more than the details, more than the audacity, more than the sheer scale of what he pulled off. Nobody who was conned by Victor Lustig was stupid. They were human. They wanted to believe in something. They wanted to be part of something. They wanted to see themselves a certain way. And he gave them that, briefly, brilliantly, before taking everything else. The world still runs the same systems Lustig used. Different packaging. Digital interfaces. More sophisticated language. But the same emotions. The same needs. The same architecture. The con hasn't changed. Only the costume has. Know the mechanism. Know your needs. Know when someone is handing you exactly what you most want to believe. That knowledge won't make you cold. It will make you untouchable. If you made it here, you just saw one of history's greatest minds at work. Not a good mind. Not a moral mind. But a mind that understood human psychology more completely than most people who spend their entire lives studying it. The next story we tell will go even deeper. You already know where to find us.